The rain hammered against the windows of the police station as Detective Marcus Chen stared at the surveillance photos spread across his desk. For 3 months, he had been watching the same man, tall, lean, with dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The man called himself Jake Sullivan, and according to Chen's investigation, he was running one of the most sophisticated drug operations the city had ever seen. Chen picked up one of the photos, studying the image of Sullivan talking to known dealers near the old warehouse district. Everything about this case felt wrong, but Chen couldn't put his finger on why. His instincts, honed by 15 years on the force, were telling him there was more to Jake Sullivan than met the eye. But his captain, Robert Harrison, was breathing down his neck for results. Captain Harrison was a man who believed in quick solutions and clean arrests. He had been promoted to his position not because of his detective skills, but because he knew how to play politics and deliver what the brass wanted to hear. Harrison had already decided that Sullivan was guilty, and he wanted Chen to build a case that would stick. The office door slammed open, and Harrison stormed in, his face red with frustration. "Chen, what's the holdup on the Sullivan case? I've got the mayor asking questions, and the press is starting to sniff around our drug problem. We need an arrest, and we need it now." Chen looked up from the photos, choosing his words carefully. "Captain, I think we need more time. Something doesn't add up about Sullivan. His movements, his contacts, the way he operates. It's almost like he's deliberately making himself visible." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me how to do my job, detective? I've been in this business longer than you've been breathing. Sullivan is dirty and I want him brought in. End of discussion." But Chen couldn't shake his doubts. He had been conducting surveillance on Sullivan for weeks, watching him meet with various suspects in the drug trade. Yet every time Chen tried to connect the dots, the evidence seemed to slip away. Witnesses would suddenly become unavailable, or their stories would change. Physical evidence would disappear from crime scenes before the lab could process it. What bothered Chen most was Sullivan's behavior during these meetings. Instead of acting like a criminal mastermind, Sullivan seemed to be asking questions, taking notes, and acting more like someone gathering information rather than someone giving orders. His body language was all wrong for a drug kingpin. He sat with his back to walls, constantly scanned his surroundings, and kept his conversations short and to the point. Chen had tried to share these observations with Harrison, but the captain wasn't interested in theories or hunches. He wanted arrests, convictions, and positive press coverage. The city was in the middle of a drug crisis, and the public was demanding action. Harrison saw Sullivan as the perfect solution to all his problems. Late one evening, Chen decided to conduct his own unauthorized surveillance. He parked his unmarked car across from Sullivan's apartment building and waited. At exactly midnight, Sullivan emerged from the building and began walking down the street. Chen followed at a distance, watching as Sullivan made his way through the city's darker neighborhoods. Sullivan's route took him through areas known for drug activity, but instead of meeting with dealers, he seemed to be observing them. He would position himself in shadows or doorways, watching drug transactions take place, but never participating. He carried a small notebook and would occasionally jot down information. This was not the behavior of someone running a drug operation. As the weeks passed, Chen became more convinced that Sullivan was not what he appeared to be. The man was too careful, too observant, and too detached from the actual criminal activity he was supposedly orchestrating. Chen began to suspect that Sullivan might be working for another law enforcement agency, possibly conducting his own investigation into the city's drug trade. Chen tried once more to convince Harrison to slow down the investigation. He requested a meeting and laid out all his observations and concerns. He explained how Sullivan's behavior was inconsistent with that of a drug dealer, how evidence kept disappearing, and how witnesses were becoming unreliable. Harrison listened with growing impatience before slamming his hand on his desk. "Chen, I don't want to hear any more of your conspiracy theories. The evidence against Sullivan is solid. We have photos of him meeting with known dealers. We have witness testimony placing him at crime scenes. We have financial records showing unexplained income. What more do you want?" Chen tried to explain that the evidence felt too convenient, too neat, but Harrison cut him off. "Detective, you're either part of the solution or part of the problem. I'm giving you 1 more week to wrap this up, or I'm assigning the case to someone who can get results." Feeling frustrated and isolated, Chen knew he had to make a decision. He could either follow Harrison's orders and arrest Sullivan based on circumstantial evidence, or he could continue his own investigation and risk his career. The weight of his 15 years of service pressed down on him, but his instincts told him that arresting Sullivan would be a huge mistake. Chen spent the next few days reviewing every piece of evidence in the case file. He studied the financial records more carefully and discovered that Sullivan's unexplained income could be traced to a series of legitimate consulting contracts with security firms. The witness testimony, when examined closely, was full of inconsistencies and came from people with criminal records who might have reasons to lie. Most importantly, Chen noticed a pattern in the timing of Sullivan's appearances at crime scenes. He always arrived after drug deals had already taken place, and he never stayed long enough to conduct business of his own. It was as if he was documenting criminal activity rather than participating in it. As Chen pieced together this new understanding of the case, he realized that Captain Harrison had either missed these crucial details or had chosen to ignore them. Either way, Chen knew that an innocent man was about to be framed for crimes he didn't commit. The question was whether Chen had the courage to stand up to his captain and potentially destroy his own career in the process. The clock was ticking, and Chen knew he had to act fast. In just a few days, Harrison would expect him to make an arrest. Chen had to decide whether to follow orders or follow his conscience, knowing that either choice would change his life forever. The next morning, Chen arrived at the station early, hoping to catch up on paperwork before Harrison arrived. Instead, he found his captain already at his desk, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. Harrison's conversation ended abruptly when he noticed Chen approaching. "Chen, good. You're here early. I've got news about the Sullivan case." Harrison's smile was too wide, too eager. "I've been in contact with the district attorney's office. They're ready to move forward with charges as soon as we bring Sullivan in." Chen felt his stomach drop. "Captain, I really think we should reconsider. I've been reviewing the evidence, and there are some serious concerns about the reliability of our witnesses and the timing of the financial records." Harrison's expression hardened. "Detective, I thought I made myself clear. This case is closed as far as I'm concerned. Sullivan is our target, and we're moving forward today." What Chen didn't know was that Harrison had his own reasons for wanting Sullivan arrested quickly. 3 months earlier, Harrison had received a call from a federal contact warning him that there might be an undercover operation running in his jurisdiction. The caller hadn't provided details, but had advised Harrison to be careful about any arrests involving drug trafficking cases. Harrison had dismissed the warning, assuming it was just federal agencies trying to protect their own investigations. He had worked too hard to build his reputation as a tough, results-oriented captain to let federal bureaucrats interfere with his cases. Besides, the Sullivan case was generating positive media attention, and Harrison was already being considered for a promotion to deputy chief. That afternoon, Harrison assembled a team to arrest Sullivan. Chen reluctantly joined the operation, still hoping he could find a way to prevent what he believed would be a terrible mistake. The team consisted of 6 officers, including Chen, and they planned to arrest Sullivan at his apartment building during the evening, when he typically returned from his daily activities. As they prepared for the arrest, Chen made one last attempt to reach Harrison. "Captain, what if we're wrong about Sullivan? What if he's not who we think he is?" Harrison's patience finally snapped. "Chen, I'm beginning to question your commitment to this department. Sullivan is a drug dealer and we're going to arrest him. If you can't handle that, maybe you need to find another line of work." The word stung, but Chen knew there was no changing Harrison's mind. As the team geared up for the arrest, Chen tried to think of any way he could warn Sullivan without compromising his own position. But with Harrison watching his every move, Chen had no choice but to go along with the operation. Meanwhile, Jake Sullivan was in his apartment, preparing for another night of surveillance. For the past 6 months, he had been working deep undercover for the FBI, investigating a corruption ring that included several high-ranking police officials. The operation, codenamed Clean Sweep, was designed to identify and prosecute law enforcement officers who were taking bribes from drug dealers or actively participating in criminal enterprises. Sullivan's real name was Special Agent Jake Morrison, and he had volunteered for this dangerous assignment because of his background in narcotics investigations. The FBI had created an elaborate cover story for him, complete with a criminal background and connections to known drug dealers. The goal was to get close enough to corrupt officers, to gather evidence of their illegal activities. Morrison had already identified several patrol officers who were taking money from drug dealers in exchange for information about police operations. He had also discovered that evidence was being regularly tampered with or destroyed before it could be processed. But the most shocking discovery was that the corruption seemed to go all the way up to the captain level. Morrison had been carefully documenting Captain Harrison's involvement in the corruption ring. Harrison was not just taking bribes. He was actively directing criminal operations and using his position to protect certain drug dealers while targeting their competitors. Morrison had hours of recorded conversations and thousands of photographs that would be enough to send Harrison to prison for decades. However, Morrison's cover was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Detective Chen's persistent surveillance was making it harder for Morrison to meet with his FBI contacts and transmit information. Morrison had noticed Chen following him on several occasions, and he was beginning to worry that his true identity might be discovered. Morrison had tried to signal his FBI handlers that his cover might be compromised, but communication protocols required him to maintain radio silence except in extreme emergencies. He was supposed to complete his investigation and gather evidence for another 2 weeks before extraction, but time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated. As evening approached, Morrison prepared to leave his apartment for another night of surveillance. He had no idea that Harrison's arrest team was already in position outside his building. Morrison's FBI training had taught him to always be alert for signs of trouble, but after months of deep cover work, he had settled into routines that made him slightly less vigilant than usual. Chen and the arrest team took their positions around Sullivan's apartment building. Harrison had stationed himself across the street with a clear view of the main entrance. Chen was positioned in the building's lobby, ready to move when Sullivan appeared. At exactly 7:30, Morrison emerged from the elevator and began walking toward the main entrance. Chen saw him first and immediately radioed the team. "Target is moving toward the exit. All units prepare to move." Morrison stepped outside and began walking down the street, unaware that he was being followed by 6 police officers. Harrison gave the signal and the team began to close in. Chen felt sick to his stomach as he watched the operation unfold, knowing that they were about to arrest someone who might be innocent. Morrison had walked only 2 blocks when he realized something was wrong. He could sense movement behind him and his training kicked in. He began to alter his route, taking random turns and checking reflections in store windows. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. He was being followed by multiple individuals who were clearly law enforcement. Morrison's mind raced as he tried to figure out what had gone wrong. Had his cover been blown? Was this a test by the criminals he was investigating? Or had the corrupt officers he was tracking discovered his true identity? Whatever the case, Morrison knew he was in serious danger. Harrison, watching from his command position, grew impatient as Morrison began evasive maneuvers. "All units, move in now. Don't let him get away." The 6 officers converged on Morrison from different directions. Morrison realized he had no choice but to surrender, hoping that once he was in custody, he could find a way to contact his FBI handlers and explain the situation. But he also knew that if Harrison was as corrupt as Morrison suspected, his life might be in serious danger. The arrest happened quickly and without incident. Morrison raised his hands as the officers surrounded him, offering no resistance. Chen was the first to reach him, placing handcuffs on Morrison's wrists while reading him his rights. Throughout the entire process, Morrison remained calm and composed, which only added to Chen's growing suspicions about the case. "Jake Sullivan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, and racketeering," Chen announced. Though his voice lacked conviction, Morrison looked directly into Chen's eyes, and for a moment, Chen saw something that made him pause. There was no fear, no anger, no surprise in Morrison's expression. Instead, there was something that looked almost like disappointment. "Officer, I need to make a phone call as soon as possible," Morrison said quietly. "It's extremely important." Harrison approached the group, his face flushed with excitement and satisfaction. "Outstanding work, team. We just took down one of the biggest drug dealers in the city." He looked at Morrison with obvious contempt. "You thought you were so smart, didn't you, Sullivan? Well, your luck just ran out." Morrison studied Harrison carefully, recognizing him from the surveillance photos in his FBI files. This was the man Morrison had been investigating for months, the corrupt captain who had been taking bribes and protecting drug dealers. The irony of the situation was not lost on Morrison. He was being arrested by the very person he was trying to expose. "Captain, I really need to make that phone call," Morrison repeated, his voice still calm but with an undertone of urgency that Chen noticed. Harrison laughed. "You'll get your phone call when we're good and ready to give it to you. Right now you're going to answer some questions about your drug operation." As they transported Morrison to the station, Chen rode in the back of the police car with him. Morrison remained silent for most of the trip, but as they neared the station, he spoke quietly to Chen. "Detective, you seem like a good cop. I can tell you have doubts about this arrest. Trust your instincts." Chen was startled by Morrison's directness. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you've been watching me for months and you know something doesn't add up. You've seen how I operate and you know I'm not running a drug operation." Chen didn't respond, but Morrison's words hit home. Throughout the investigation, Chen had observed Morrison's behavior carefully, and nothing about it had suggested criminal activity. Morrison was too careful, too observant, and too detached from the actual drug trade to be running a criminal enterprise. At the station, Morrison was processed and placed in an interrogation room. Harrison was eager to begin questioning him immediately, but standard procedure required that Morrison be allowed to make his phone call first. Harrison reluctantly agreed but insisted that the call be monitored. Morrison was led to a phone in the booking area. He dialed a number from memory and waited for someone to answer. Chen, who was standing nearby, could hear Morrison's side of the conversation. "This is Jake Morrison, badge number 7749. I need immediate assistance. I'm currently in custody at the downtown police station and my cover has been compromised." Chen's blood ran cold. "Badge number?" Morrison was clearly identifying himself as a law enforcement officer. Chen looked around to see if Harrison had heard the conversation, but the captain was busy talking to the district attorney on his own phone. Morrison continued his conversation. "Yes, I understand the protocols, but this is an emergency situation. The subject of my investigation is the arresting officer, and I'm in immediate danger." Chen realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Morrison wasn't just a suspected drug dealer. He was an undercover law enforcement officer. And if Chen had heard correctly, he was investigating Captain Harrison. Chen's mind raced as he tried to process the implications of what he had just learned. Morrison finished his phone call and was led back to the interrogation room. Chen followed, his mind spinning with questions and concerns. If Morrison was really an undercover officer, then the entire investigation had been a setup. But who was setting up whom? Harrison entered the interrogation room with a thick file folder and a tape recorder. He was clearly confident that this interrogation would be the culmination of his successful investigation. Chen stood in the corner, observing and trying to decide what he should do with the information he had overheard. "Mr. Sullivan, or whoever you really are," Harrison began, "we have enough evidence to put you away for a very long time. Drug trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy. You're looking at decades in prison." Morrison looked at Harrison with steady eyes. "Captain Harrison, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Special Agent Jake Morrison with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I'm working undercover on an authorized federal investigation." Harrison's expression didn't change. "That's a very creative story, Mr. Sullivan. Do you have any identification to support this claim?" Morrison shook his head. "My identification and credentials are secured in a federal facility. But if you contact the FBI field office and ask for Assistant Director Sarah Parker, she can verify my identity and my assignment." Harrison leaned back in his chair, a smug smile spreading across his face. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been a police officer for 25 years. I've heard every story, every excuse, every lie that criminals can come up with. Claiming to be a federal agent is not original." Chen watched this exchange with growing alarm. If Morrison was really an FBI agent, then Harrison was either making a terrible mistake or was deliberately trying to compromise a federal investigation. Either way, Chen knew he was witnessing something that could destroy careers and potentially put lives in danger. Morrison remained calm throughout Harrison's verbal assault. "Captain, I understand your skepticism, but I strongly advise you to verify my identity before proceeding with this interrogation. If you continue to hold me without contacting the FBI, you could be interfering with a federal investigation." Harrison's smile faded slightly, but he pressed on. "Mr. Sullivan, we have photographs of you meeting with known drug dealers. We have financial records showing unexplained income. We have witness testimony placing you at crime scenes. How do you explain all of that? Morrison chose his words carefully. Captain, everything you've observed is part of my undercover assignment. I've been investigating corruption within local law enforcement agencies, and my cover required me to appear to be involved in criminal activity. The room fell silent. Chen could see Harrison's face redden with anger, but there was also something else in his expression. Fear. Chen realized that Morrison's words had struck a nerve with Harrison, and the captain's reaction was confirming Chen's worst suspicions about the case. Harrison stood up abruptly. This interrogation is over. Mr. Sullivan, you're going to be charged and held without bail. Your fairy tales about being an FBI agent won't save you. But Chen had heard enough. As Harrison stormed out of the interrogation room, Chen knew he had to make a decision that would affect the rest of his career. The question was whether he had the courage to do what was right, even if it meant challenging his captain and potentially destroying his own future with the department. Chen followed Harrison out of the interrogation room, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just witnessed. In the hallway, Harrison was already on his phone, speaking in urgent hushed tones to someone about moving forward with charges immediately. Captain, Chen called out, causing Harrison to end his call abruptly. What is it, Chen? I'm busy. Chen took a deep breath, knowing that his next words could end his career. Captain, I think we need to verify Sullivan's claims about being an FBI agent before we proceed any further. Harrison's eyes narrowed dangerously. Detective, are you questioning my judgment? Are you suggesting that I don't know how to handle a suspect's obvious lies? Sir, it's not about your judgment. It's about procedure. If there's even a chance that Sullivan is telling the truth about being a federal agent, we could be creating a massive problem for the department. Harrison stepped closer to Chen, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Detective Chen, let me make something very clear to you. Jake Sullivan is a drug dealer, and he's going to be charged as a drug dealer. If you can't handle that, maybe you need to turn in your badge right now. Chen felt the weight of 15 years of service pressing down on him. He had always been a good soldier, following orders and trusting his superiors. But everything about this case felt wrong, and Morrison's calm demeanor and specific claims were impossible to ignore. Captain, all I'm asking is that we make one phone call to the FBI field office. If Sullivan is lying, it won't take them long to tell us that. But if he's telling the truth? Harrison's face turned red with rage. Chen, you're relieved of duty on this case. Go home. Now. And if I hear that you've been discussing this case with anyone, you'll be facing disciplinary action. Chen knew he had pushed as far as he could without completely destroying his career. He nodded reluctantly and began walking toward his desk to collect his personal items. But as he walked away, he heard Harrison make another phone call. Yeah, it's me. We have a problem. The suspect is claiming to be FBI, and one of my detectives is starting to ask questions. We need to move fast. Chen couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Harrison's responses made it clear that there was more to this situation than a simple drug arrest. Someone was giving Harrison instructions about how to handle Morrison, and that someone seemed to have a lot of influence over the captain. Chen left the station but didn't go home. Instead, he drove to a coffee shop several blocks away and tried to think through his options. He could walk away and pretend that nothing unusual had happened, protecting his career and his pension. Or he could try to verify Morrison's claims on his own, risking everything he had worked for over the past 15 years. As Chen sat in his car, he remembered Morrison's words. Trust your instincts. Chen's instincts had been telling him for months that something was wrong with the Sullivan case. The evidence was too convenient, the witnesses were too unreliable, and Morrison's behavior was completely inconsistent with that of a drug dealer. Chen made his decision. He drove to the FBI field office downtown and asked to speak with Assistant Director Sarah Parker. The receptionist was initially reluctant to disturb Parker without an appointment, but when Chen explained that it was an urgent matter involving a potential federal agent in custody, she agreed to contact Parker immediately. 20 minutes later, Chen was sitting in Parker's office explaining the entire situation. Parker listened carefully, asking detailed questions about Morrison's arrest and Harrison's behavior. When Chen finished his account, Parker's expression was grim. Detective Chen, I need to tell you something that might shock you. Special Agent Morrison has been working undercover for 6 months investigating corruption in your department. Captain Harrison is the primary target of that investigation. Chen felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Are you saying that Harrison knew Morrison was FBI? Parker shook her head. We don't think Harrison knew Morrison's true identity, but Harrison has been under investigation for taking bribes from drug dealers and using his position to protect certain criminal organizations. Morrison's arrest tonight suggests that Harrison may be more desperate than we realized. Chen's mind reeled as he tried to process this information. What happens now? Parker was already reaching for her phone. Now we move fast. Morrison is in serious danger, and we need to get him out of that jail cell before Harrison decides to eliminate the threat permanently. Within 30 minutes, Parker had assembled a team of federal agents and was coordinating with the FBI's legal department to secure Morrison's immediate release. Chen accompanied the federal team back to the police station, knowing that his career with the local police department was probably over. When they arrived at the station, they found Harrison in his office, frantically shredding documents. Several federal agents moved to secure the captain's office while Parker demanded Morrison's immediate release. Harrison tried to maintain his authority, insisting that he had the right to hold Sullivan for questioning, but Parker's federal warrant quickly ended that argument. Morrison was brought up from the holding cells, and Chen could see the relief in his eyes when he saw Parker and the federal agents. Harrison watched helplessly as his carefully constructed case fell apart before his eyes. Captain Harrison, Parker announced formally, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and interfering with a federal investigation. As federal agents placed handcuffs on Harrison, he looked directly at Chen with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done, Chen. You've destroyed everything. Chen felt no satisfaction in watching his captain being arrested. The entire situation was a tragedy that could have been avoided if Harrison had simply verified Morrison's identity, instead of rushing to make an arrest that would advance his own career. Parker approached Chen as Harrison was being led away. Detective, Agent Morrison tells me that you had doubts about this case from the beginning. Your instincts probably saved his life tonight. Chen looked at Morrison, who was being debriefed by federal agents. I just wish I had trusted my instincts sooner. Maybe I could have prevented all of this. Morrison overheard Chen's comment and walked over to them. Detective, you did exactly what you needed to do. If you had acted sooner, it might have compromised the entire investigation. Your timing was perfect. But Chen knew that the real consequences of this night were just beginning. The corruption investigation would now become public, and the entire police department would be under scrutiny. Chen's role in exposing the truth would make him a hero to some and a traitor to others. As he watched federal agents collecting evidence from Harrison's office, Chen realized that his life as a police officer would never be the same. He had chosen to do what was right, but that choice came with a price that he was only beginning to understand. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of federal investigations, internal affairs inquiries, and media attention. Chen found himself at the center of a corruption scandal that reached deep into the police department's command structure. Harrison's arrest had been just the beginning. Morrison's undercover investigation had uncovered a network of corrupt officers that included patrol cops, detectives, and supervisors. Chen was placed on administrative leave while internal affairs conducted their investigation. Although he was cleared of any wrongdoing, the department's leadership made it clear that his future there was uncertain. Many of his fellow officers viewed him as a traitor who had sided with the federal government against his own department. Morrison, whose real identity was now public knowledge, testified before a federal grand jury about the extent of the corruption he had witnessed. His 6 months undercover had produced hundreds of hours of recorded conversations, thousands of photographs, and detailed documentation of bribes, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Harrison had been taking monthly payments from a drug trafficking organization in exchange for protecting their operations and targeting their competitors. Several patrol officers had been selling information about police raids and arrests. Evidence had been routinely destroyed or altered to protect certain suspects while ensuring convictions for others. Chen attended Morrison's debriefing sessions when invited, helping to fill in details about the department's procedures and personnel. During these meetings, he learned the full extent of what Morrison had endured during his undercover assignment. The hardest part, Morrison explained to Chen during one of their conversations, was watching good cops like you struggle with cases that didn't make sense, knowing that I couldn't tell you what was really happening. Chen shook his head in amazement. I can't believe you maintained your cover for 6 months while watching Harrison try to frame you. How did you stand it? Morrison smiled grimly. Training helps, but honestly, there were times when I thought about breaking cover and revealing my identity, especially when I realized that Harrison was planning to arrest me. But my supervisors convinced me that we needed to let the corruption play out completely to build the strongest possible case. As the federal investigation progressed, more details emerged about Harrison's criminal activities. The disgraced captain had been involved in the drug trade for over 3 years, using his position to eliminate competition and protect his chosen partners. He had also been skimming money from drug seizures and selling confiscated weapons back to criminals. The investigation revealed that Harrison's corruption had directly contributed to the city's drug crisis. By protecting certain dealers and eliminating others, he had helped create a monopoly that drove up drug prices and increased violence as competing organizations fought for territory. Chen learned that his own instincts about the Sullivan case had been shared by other detectives in the department. Several officers had noticed irregularities in cases involving Harrison, but none had been willing to challenge the captain's authority. The culture of the department had discouraged questioning superiors, creating an environment where corruption could flourish. The media coverage of the scandal was intense and unforgiving. Reporters portrayed the entire police department as corrupt and incompetent, focusing on how Harrison had been able to operate undetected for years. Chen found himself both praised as a whistleblower and criticized for not acting sooner. During one particularly difficult interview with investigators, Chen was asked why he hadn't reported his suspicions about Harrison earlier. Detective, you've stated that you had concerns about Captain Harrison's handling of the Sullivan case for weeks. Why didn't you take your concerns to internal affairs or to federal authorities? Chen struggled to explain the complex dynamics of police culture and the pressure to follow orders. In my experience, challenging a superior officer's judgment is a good way to end your career. I tried to raise my concerns with Captain Harrison directly, but he made it clear that questioning his decisions was not acceptable. The interviewer pressed further. But surely you understood that an innocent person might be wrongly convicted if you didn't speak up. Chen felt the weight of that accusation. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I suspected that Harrison was making mistakes, but I never imagined that he was actively corrupt. If I had known that Morrison was an FBI agent in danger, I would have acted immediately. As the weeks passed, Chen watched his department disintegrate under the weight of the scandal. Several officers were arrested, many more were suspended, and the remaining personnel struggled to maintain public trust while dealing with their own feelings of betrayal and anger. The mayor announced a complete restructuring of the police department, with federal oversight and new leadership brought in from other cities. Chen was offered the opportunity to stay with the restructured department, but he wasn't sure if he wanted to continue his career in an organization that had failed so dramatically. Morrison, meanwhile, was being hailed as a hero for his undercover work, but Chen could see the toll that the assignment had taken on him. The agent looked tired and stressed, and he admitted to Chen that maintaining his cover while watching corruption unfold had been one of the most difficult experiences of his career. There were nights when I would go back to my apartment and just sit there, thinking about all the cases that were being compromised by Harrison's corruption, Morrison told Chen. Knowing that real criminals were getting away with crimes while innocent people were being targeted was almost unbearable. Chen found himself developing a deep respect for Morrison's professionalism and dedication. The FBI agent had risked his life to expose corruption, and he had done so while maintaining his cover even under the most stressful circumstances. As the grand jury prepared to issue indictments, Chen received a call from the FBI asking if he would be interested in joining their agency. Parker explained that they were looking for experienced investigators who had demonstrated integrity under pressure. Detective Chen, your actions in the Morrison case show exactly the kind of judgment and courage we value in our agents. You trusted your instincts, you did the right thing despite personal cost, and you helped expose corruption that was harming your community. Chen was surprised by the offer and asked for time to consider it. He had spent his entire adult life in local law enforcement, and the idea of starting over with a federal agency was both exciting and terrifying. That evening, Chen called Morrison to discuss the FBI's offer. Morrison encouraged him to seriously consider the opportunity. "Chen, you've got good instincts and solid investigative skills. More importantly, you've proven that you'll do the right thing even when it's difficult. The FBI needs people like you." As Chen hung up the phone, he realized that the corruption scandal had changed him in fundamental ways. He could no longer simply follow orders without questioning them, and he could no longer trust institutional authority without verification. These changes would make him a better investigator, but they would also make it difficult for him to function in a traditional police hierarchy. 6 months after Harrison's arrest, Chen stood in the federal courthouse watching as his former captain was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom as she described the devastating impact of Harrison's corruption on the community he had sworn to protect. "Captain Harrison, your actions didn't just betray your oath as a police officer," the judge said. "You betrayed every honest cop who served under you, every citizen who trusted you to protect them, and every family that was harmed by the criminals you chose to protect." Harrison showed no emotion as he was led away in handcuffs. Chen felt a mixture of sadness and relief watching the man who had once been his superior disappear through the courthouse doors. Justice had been served, but the damage Harrison had caused would take years to repair. Morrison was also in the courtroom, having testified as the key witness in Harrison's trial. His undercover work had provided the evidence that made Harrison's conviction possible, but Chen could see that the experience had changed the FBI agent. Morrison was more serious now, more cautious in his interactions with others. After the sentencing, Chen, Morrison, and Assistant Director Parker met for coffee at a quiet restaurant near the courthouse. The atmosphere was subdued as they reflected on the case that had brought them together. "You know," Morrison said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, "when I started that undercover assignment, I thought I was just investigating a few corrupt cops. I never imagined that the corruption went so deep or that it would take down an entire command structure." Parker nodded. "That's often how these cases develop. You start pulling on one thread, and you discover that the entire fabric is compromised." Harrison's case led us to corruption in 3 other police departments in the region. Chen had accepted the FBI's offer and would be starting at the Federal Academy in 2 weeks. The decision had not been easy, but he realized that his experience with the Harrison case had prepared him for the kind of complex investigations that federal agents regularly handled. "I keep thinking about all the cases that Harrison corrupted over the years," Chen said. "How many innocent people were convicted because of evidence he tampered with? How many guilty people walked free because he protected them? We may never know the full extent of the damage." The investigation had revealed that Harrison's corruption had affected dozens of cases over a 3-year period. Several convictions were being overturned and numerous cases were being reopened. Families who had lost loved ones to drug violence were learning that Harrison's protection of certain dealers had contributed to the chaos in their neighborhoods. Morrison had received a commendation for his undercover work, but he confided to Chen that he wasn't sure he wanted to take on another long-term assignment like the Harrison case. 6 months of living a lie, watching crimes happen that I couldn't prevent, building relationships with people I knew I would eventually betray. It takes a toll. Chen understood Morrison's feelings. The case had taught him that fighting corruption often required personal sacrifices that went beyond what most people could imagine. Morrison had spent half a year isolated from his real life, unable to contact friends or family, living with the constant threat of discovery. Parker had been promoted to deputy director as a result of her successful handling of the corruption investigation. She told Chen and Morrison that the FBI was developing new protocols for undercover operations based on lessons learned from Morrison's assignment. "One of the things we learned," Parker explained, "is that we need better communication systems for agents working deep cover." Morrison's situation could have become much more dangerous if Detective Chen hadn't trusted his instincts and contacted us. The restaurant where they met was in the same neighborhood where Morrison had conducted much of his surveillance during his undercover assignment. As they talked, Morrison pointed out locations where he had observed drug deals, corrupt police officers taking bribes, and evidence being destroyed. "It's strange being back here as myself," Morrison said. For 6 months I walked these streets as Jake Sullivan, and people in this neighborhood knew me as a criminal. Now I'm here as FBI Special Agent Morrison, and I wonder if any of them recognize me. Chen realized that Morrison's experience had given him insights into criminal culture that would make him an invaluable agent for future investigations. The same was true for Chen's experience with police. Corruption, he now understood how institutional pressures could lead good people to make bad decisions. The media attention around the case had finally begun to die down, but Chen knew that the Harrison scandal would have lasting effects on law enforcement in the city. Public trust in the police had been severely damaged, and it would take years of honest, competent work to rebuild that trust. Chen's former colleagues at the police department had mixed reactions to his decision to join the FBI. Some viewed it as a betrayal, while others understood that Chen needed a fresh start after the trauma of exposing his own captain's corruption. Chen hoped that time would heal some of the relationships that had been damaged by the case. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Morrison handed Chen a business card. "When you finish at the academy, give me a call. I think we could work well together on future cases." Chen pocketed the card, knowing that his partnership with Morrison was just beginning. They had been brought together by chance during the Harrison investigation, but their shared experience of doing the right thing under difficult circumstances had created a bond that would serve them well in future investigations. Walking out of the restaurant, Chen reflected on how much his life had changed in just 1 year. He had gone from being a local detective following orders to becoming a federal agent, responsible for investigating complex corruption cases. The transition hadn't been easy, but Chen knew he had made the right choice. Morrison headed back to the FBI field office while Chen drove home to finish packing for his move to the Federal Academy. As he drove through the city where he had spent his entire career, Chen thought about the lessons he had learned from the Harrison case. The most important lesson was that institutional loyalty could never supersede personal integrity. Chen had spent 15 years believing that supporting his superiors was the same as supporting justice. But the Harrison case had taught him that sometimes justice required challenging authority. Chen also learned that corruption rarely existed in isolation. Harrison's crimes had been enabled by a culture that discouraged questioning authority and rewarded blind obedience. Changing that culture would require more than just arresting corrupt officials. It would require changing the way law enforcement agencies operated. As Chen pulled into his driveway, he thought about Morrison's courage in maintaining his undercover identity for 6 months while investigating people who could have killed him if his cover had been blown. That kind of dedication to justice was what Chen hoped to bring to his new career with the FBI. The Harrison case had ended with justice being served, but Chen knew that the fight against corruption was ongoing. There would always be people in positions of authority who would be tempted to abuse their power for personal gain. It would be up to people like Chen and Morrison to ensure that such corruption was exposed and punished. 2 weeks later, Chen reported to the FBI Academy, ready to begin a new chapter in his career. He carried with him the lessons learned from the Harrison case and a determination to never again remain silent when he witnessed injustice. The case had taught him that doing the right thing often came with a personal cost, but it was a cost that was always worth paying.